The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, March 4th, 2018-19. My name is Sam Seder. This is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, professor of history at New York University, author of The End of the Myth, From the Frontier to the Border Wall in the Mind of America. Greg Grandin will be here. Also on the program today, Trump blames Michael Cohen for his North Korea failure. Rand Paul supposedly, allegedly, going to be the vote to counter Trump's state of emergency. And then buckle up, folks. John Hickenlooper is in. The 2020 presidential candidate drops in with a huge promise of sitting down with Mitch McConnell, straightening all this stuff out. Two guys sitting around having a beer. Meanwhile, Seb Gorka out at Fox. Probably because of AOC's hamburger attacks.
The era of the pajama boy is over.
No charges for Sacramento police who shot and killed unarmed Stephon Clark. Meanwhile, El Salvador has gotten so dangerous now, cops are fleeing the country. House votes on a massive anti-corruption package. And as the Arctic cold hits the Midwest, 23 die in Alabama as severe storms hit across the South. All this and more on today's program, folks. Of course, we'll also be getting to your calls and IMs. Jamie is out on her Mexican, what is it called? Mexican Fiesta, I guess. And Michael is just on. It's Michael's Monday siesta.
Michael Monday.
So there it is. But we do have a special guest in studio, coming from Massachusetts. Do you want me to say your name? Does it matter? Joanne?
It's another Massachusetts sports fan.
Joanne, another Massachusetts sports fan. So, folks, first off, let me just start by saying I attempted to live stream from the Bernie rally in Brooklyn this weekend to very, very little success. In fact, zero success. Although I was able to get out on Instagram. And so if you do not have Instagram or you haven't signed up to follow us on Instagram, listen to Grandpa talk about it this way. Whatever you do to go on Instagram...
Log on to Instagram.
Log on to Instagram and do the thing where you can see our stuff at majorityreport.fm. That's our Instagram handle. Now, of course, I have a couple of Finstas, but I just have those so that the Majority Reporter fans can't find me, just in case I'm looking at stuff that's lurid. But the Majority Report Instagram has at least, some footage from just where we were at the beginning. It was super cold. And I don't think that you can overestimate how much this cold... I mean, it was a very enthusiastic crowd, and it was a big crowd. I haven't seen any specific numbers. I have a feeling probably around 10,000, but I'm not sure.
I saw 13,000.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense to me. And... But I think, if it had been 5 or 10 degrees warmer, I think people would have been nuts. But I know for myself, I was like spending a lot of time going like doing this, and it was cold, and it got colder as the rally went on. The wind was coming in, the sun got covered up because of the storm that that came through last night. I guess maybe, I'm not sure where that was, but it was very exciting. Some great speakers right before Bernie Sanders, and then here is one clip from that speech.
Today, we say to the 1% and the large profitable corporations in America, listen up, because this applies to you. We say to the 1% in large corporations that under a Bernie Sanders administration, you're not going to be getting more tax breaks. Quite the contrary. We're going to end your tax breaks and your loopholes. You are going to start paying your fair share of taxes. We will no longer accept the absurd situation where large multi-billion-dollar corporations like Amazon, Netflix, and General Motors pay nothing in federal income taxes. And we're not going to allow these corporations and the billionaires to stash their money in the Cayman Islands and in other tax havens. Yes, the wealthy and multinational corporations will start paying their fair share of taxes. We're going to end austerity for working families and bring a little austerity for the wealthy and the powerful.
That's a nice twist on the program of austerity. It was about a 35-minute speech and really ranged across the board. We'll talk more about it later in the program, but it was super exciting to be at the launch of that campaign. And let me just say this, in terms of the primary, I don't think we're going to do our best around here not to get too heavy into the primary too early. But obviously, as people join in the race, there's going to end up being about another 15. I mean, not another 15, but I have a feeling we're going to have about 15 candidates probably before this is over, maybe more. And but the first debates are in June, and until then, for the most part, I'm hoping that we're going to be able to just sort of talk about different proposals that are brought up by different candidates. At this point, we've heard stuff from like Cory Booker, the baby bonds proposal, which I think is a pretty good proposal. Elizabeth Warren, I think, to be honest, so far has introduced the most interesting and dynamic proposals. When you think about universal child care, and when you think about prescription drugs being manufactured by the U.S. government, talking about generics. And then, of course, I think Klobuchar had said something about
tax advantage savings accounts.
Tax advantage savings accounts. And, incidentally, we're going to spend time making fun of proposals like that. When John Hickenlooper says that what I'm going to be able to do is sit down with Mitch McConnell and work things out, I'm going to make fun of that because that is that's like Brandon Straka level of delusion. And anybody who can actually go on television and say that is necessarily either completely out of it or just totally lying. And so some of that stuff is we're not going to get treated. But I will say this. We have lost some members because they don't appreciate the fact that we are too Bernie friendly here. It's not that many, but whatever. And that's fine. If people, I think, at least Michael and I have made it clear, like there's plenty of candidates that we could get with on the Democratic side in the general election. I am, between Bernie and Warren, I think I would be equally happy. And maybe there's other candidates to jump in. I don't know. But here's one thing that, and I don't mind. You don't want to be a member? Don't be a member. But if you email and threaten me with your membership to change the programming, I mean, this hasn't been a problem as much in the past couple of years, but there was a problem with this, at other times. I will tell you that I will develop a technology to keep you from listening to even the free show. I will spend my time. I will fire you. You will not fire me. I will fire you. So just don't try and leverage. That is why we have this system here. That is why I never wanted to be sponsored by a some type of organization or whatnot. I mean, sure, I would be open to partnerships and whatnot, but because I do not take well to people trying to leverage money. It may be a personality defect, and it may be a little bit more extreme than it probably should be. But so don't email that way. You can email and say, like, I'm sorry, I got to take a break from the show because I'm too supportive of blankety blank and I get uncomfortable with it. Totally get it. But if you email and you go like, if you guys don't stop blankety blank, I'm going to quit. You're fired. I will fire you. And if I'm in a good mood, I'll tell you. But otherwise, you're just not going to have access to the show. So, and, well, I guess maybe this might be a way to get around that. But it may feel like cybercrime is something that happens to other people, but stealing data for unsuspecting people on public Wi-Fi is one of the simplest ways for hackers to make money. When you leave your internet connection unencrypted, you might as well be writing your passwords and credit card numbers on a huge billboard for the whole world to see. Protect yourself with ExpressVPN. ExpressVPN secures and anonymizes your internet browsing by encrypting your data and hiding your public IP address. For instance, so if you wanted to, let's say, I don't know, if you got fired from being a member on a podcast and wanted to make sure they didn't know it was you, this is what you would use when you were trying to download. But of course, the internet security is the main reason for ExpressVPN. It has easy-to-use apps that run seamlessly in the background of your computer, your phone, your tablet. Turning on ExpressVPN protection only takes one click, and it costs less than $7 a month. ExpressVPN is rated #1 VPN service by TechRadar, comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee. A lot of people go out there now with their phones and they use, all sorts of different types of public Wi-Fi. Airport, it's free, great, except for you try and buy something, you are basically opening yourself up to a whole lot of trouble. You can protect your online activity today. Find out how you can get 3 months free at expressvpn.com/majority. That's expressvpn.com/majority for 3 months free with a 1-year package. Visit expressvpn.com/majority to learn more. Express, EXPRESSVPN.com/majority. All right. Lastly, before we get to Greg Grandin, I said my spiel about members who trying to leverage membership for content changes in the show. I don't mind criticism. I just don't like it when people try and leverage that stuff. I do not do well with that. But this was a great email. Dear MR, I started listening to the show 4 years ago. I've been a member for about 3. I was a 28-year-old Taiwanese woman teaching English in my country. I had never left for an extended period of time. Your show not only informed me about politics, but motivated me to pursue it in some fashion. I decided to get a master's degree in Paris, large part because the tuition is literally 260 euros a year, and every student gets housing subsidy regardless of nationality.
Not quite the same at NYU.
Yeah, not exactly the same. My Master 1 thesis is on the Tea Party and conservatism, and my Master 2 thesis is on the right's history of fighting culture wars from Buchanan to Trump. You can see Majority Report's influence all over them. I've just been offered 2 fully funded admissions into the political science PhD programs at Berkeley and Columbia.
Wow.
And we'll be visiting the campuses next month to decide where to go. I'm writing to thank you guys, not only for inspiring me in a passion for politics, but equipping me with insights and perspectives that have helped me come this far. I'm anxious about starting a 5-year program at 32, but knowing that MR will be with me every step of the way is a tremendous source of comfort. If I do end up in New York and I get a chance to go to your live shows, I hope to be able to thank you in person. I'm sure there are numerous stories like mine out there, but I thought I'd add to the chorus that you guys are changing lives. And that's from listener Kara. First of all, if you come to New York, come into the studio. But second of all, thank you so much for this email. I almost don't even believe that this is a real person. But it's incredibly sweet and very gratifying. So thank you. All right, we're going to take a quick break. Don't forget, you can support this show by going to jointhemajorityreport.com. Also, justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code MAJORITY, get 10% off. When we come back, the end of the myth. From the frontier to the border wall in the mind of America, Greg Grandin. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report on the phone. It's a pleasure to welcome to the program Professor of History at New York University, best-selling author of Fordlandia, and now his most recent, The End of the Myth, From the Frontier to the Border Wall in the Mind of America, Greg Grandin. Welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me on again.
So, all right, let's start with because in some respects, I guess this story starts with what you call America's founding paradox. What is that founding paradox?
Well, the founding paradox is the idea of the way the idea of expansion was built into the premise of United States history, that expansion would solve all of the problems inherent in a society founded on the rights of property and individual rights. That early Republican theorists about the concentration of wealth, and then they were worried about very modern problems, the inequality, political monopoly. They were worried, obviously weren't worried about industrialization yet or things like that, but all of the big problems that go with a society founded on individual rights were understood to also generate serious vectors or venues of corruption, of monopoly control, and they tried to figure out ways to work around that, and what they came up with in very explicit terms was expansion. You extend the sphere and you dilute factionalism. You dilute the tendency of individuals, what we now would call class conflict and class struggle.
So the idea is just keep making the pie bigger, and then you're not going to have people arguing over how much pie they get, because there's just going to be an ever those are going to be pie until infinity, until of course you run out of pie, and then the question is, where are you going to get that pie from?
Right. Well, eventually there is no more outside anymore, and eventually you hit limits. I mean, there were lots of different ways in which expansion was understood to solve the problems to solve social problems. Expansion was understood to dilute factionalism, dilute class conflict. You can also use expansion and the promise of limitless growth to organize domestic politics, to establish what a moral society looked like, and this is a prerogative that's very much unique to the United States. I mean, look, there's been other empires and other expansive nations, but it's hard to think of another country that has for so long, for centuries, and we're talking about across the landed frontier, and the book is a long history. It's a 300-year history that covers the continental expansion, across the frontier, across the United States, and then other vectors of expansion, military, markets, cultural, political, and it's hard to think of another country that has become so dependent on the promise of unlimited growth in order to solve domestic problems, but also organize domestic politics, to kind of create a sense of right and wrong, to transcend contradictions within political constituencies. Foreign policy has been central to U.S. domestic politics for a long time, and something that I argue isn't recognized.
Yeah, all right. Well, there's a lot there that. So let's just start with that notion of why. I mean, is it as simple because the United States is the one of those rare, I guess, countries that had, because of the timing in which it was founded and the amount of natural resources that it had, is that why that attitude is there, or is it simply because the founding itself was the idea of crossing the Atlantic? I mean, why do you think that's...
Crossing the Atlantic? Yeah, I think all of those things. I mean, there's not one answer why. It's a bit overdetermined, but certainly the timing, the related to European expansion, Anglo expansion, theological debates and conflicts within Protestantism, between Protestantism and Catholicism, the way that those tensions, theological arguments get played out, where the solution is understood to move forward. The settlers were either going to open up a new front in old world battles, or the New World provided a chance to start a new errand into the wilderness to provide a model of what a city on a hill looked like. There's many different propulsions, many different things that moving forward. Certainly material resources and the fact that the continent was understood to not be held by a sovereign power. Obviously, there were Native Americans, right, and that was and the violence that was visited on Native Americans is part of the process and part of the problem of expansion. But all of those reasons, I think, has to do with the unique history of America and what makes America exceptional.
I mean, and so I guess in some respects, like, the first, the journey on the frontier happened, I guess, when they get on the boats from Europe, right? And well, even not from Europe, from Saxony, from right. Saxon Germany. Thomas Jefferson, 3 years before the Declaration of Independence, his very first political tract talked about the right to immigrate, the right to migrate, to pull up stakes. When Saxon freemen didn't want to submit to feudal overlords, they just moved over to the Isles of Britain, and then from Britain to America. So the right to migrate wasn't Jefferson. It was more than just a natural right. It was the condition of natural rights. It made liberty possible because you could just pull up stakes and escape tyranny. And so it was Saxons from Europe to Great Britain to the British Isles, and from the British Isles to the Americas, and then America West. This was before the Declaration of Independence. This was a foundational idea of that the right to movement, and in this case, and particularly to move west, was a foundation of what we call modern political liberty. Okay, so let's when you talk about the idea of expansion being an answer to domestic problems, just for the sake of, and there's obviously you cover a lot of examples, but give us one so that folks can sort of move from the conception to the sort of the tangible on that.
Yeah, it's too easy to stay in the abstract. Well, one example is there was a lot of concern about granting suffrage to non-propertied, illiterate white men. What would happen if they voted in socialism? What would happen if they had a majority vote and they voted in some kind of class party or class politics? So the ability to use the land dispossessed by Native Americans during Indian removal, was key to stopping that problem, expanding suffrage while not leading to a kind of socialist vote. So you had Jacksonian democracy going hand in hand and being absolutely dependent on Indian removal. You had another very concrete example is the regional factionalism after the Civil War between North and South. That is transcended and overcome in the War of 1898. The War of 1898 is the way in which former Confederate sons and grandsons are reincorporated into U.S. military, fully incorporated. It started earlier than that, but the mission to liberate Cuba from Spanish Empire and the Philippines from the Spanish Empire, from Spanish medievalism, was a way in which Southerners could reclaim not just a space within an expanding nation through the military and through war, but claim the mantle of bringing democracy to the world. And they were able to retranslate their Civil War, their secession, which was fought to defend chattel slavery. They were able to reinterpret that as part of this long crusade of bringing liberty to the world. Those are just two examples. But if you actually think about it, there's no progressive movement in the United States moment that hasn't been dependent on expansion. I talked about Jacksonian democracy, the Civil War, the pacification of the West and the promise of free land was key in building a loyal Union army. The progressives who broke up the trusts were also interested in breaking up the Spanish Empire. The New Deal was dependent on the expansion of foreign markets and winning World War II. Some suffragists traded their support for World War I in exchange for Wilson's support for the right of women to vote. So you can go down the line, and there has been a way in which social reform and the way that ruling coalitions use social reform to establish political legitimacy and hegemony has been has been absolutely dependent on the ability to move out in the world.
Now, the first example you gave of having this uneducated class of white essentially workers, and how are we going to give them the vote, but also prevent their interests from being misaligned with ours? We're going to co-opt them by giving them property. And on some level, it sounds a little bit like George Bush's ownership society, as it were. But, putting that aside, so that one, it seems really explicit, right? And it literally involves physical expansion. The others involve expansion in terms of, I think what we could call now imperialism. How is the United States unique in that sort of the second regard from other imperialistic, like how else would, because obviously European countries did not necessarily, I guess maybe on some level this is what Hitler was thinking in terms of trying to expand Germany, but European nations did not have the opportunity to say like, oh, we're going to buy off part of our population by giving them what seems to be like a never-ending amount of land that is uninhabited by people that we consider to be people, right? Like it.
Yeah. Well, there has been studies that looked at what they call social imperialism, the ability to use empire and colonialism to buy off a working class in different ways. But what's unique about the United States is one, the denial of colonialism, right? That it's an expansive power that became the single most powerful polity in world history, while being able to credibly deny that it is an empire or it is a colonial power. So there's the inbuilt denial mechanism, but there's also the kind of concept of freedom, which I think is very unique to the United States, right? There's a move across the West of expanding a greater liberty for white men, by basically putting down people of color, either through chattel slavery, their labor, or taking their land, Native Americans, or taking territory from Mexico. And then, so moving west and claiming a larger liberty by putting down people of color, but then defining that liberty in opposition to people of color. Freedom was understood as freedom from restraint. And I think that's one of the key things that is that's particular to the United States is self-conception of itself, right? A notion of individualism and freedom defined as a minimal state and freedom from restraint, and that I think is one of the key things that's different from maybe other British colonial powers that developed a more socialized. They dealt more directly with the labor question, with the class question, with the social question and the emergence of class politics and social democratic politics, which in the United States has been long absent.
Okay, and so we have this this like sort of fundamental, I guess, psychological, maybe is too reductive, but this character, this national character that involves expansion as a means in which to solve problems, at least domestic problems, and then once we literally run out of territory, we need to start to expand in terms of, if not in capturing territory, but in capturing resources and hegemony around the world. And then once that becomes sort of less, more and more difficult to do, and I guess that changes too, from it's less about ships and more about, maybe to some extent about ships, but less about ships and air forces and more about like capturing markets. But at one point that becomes, it's just the world is finite. And so what happens is it bounces back in on us. Is that basically what happens?
It does bounce back. And there's different ways in which expansion has, across the continent, and the idea of the frontier and the way the frontier itself becomes a term unique to the United States and becomes more of a state of mind and a site of existential creation, and the way then the word frontier is used to discuss other forms of expansion, be they through war into the Philippines or market expansion. And there's been moments of limits, right? There's been other moments in which the U.S. hits the wall, so to speak, right? Because in some ways it's a subjective wall. There was the Great Depression of the 1930s and the emergence of the New Deal, and in some ways the New Deal was very much steeped in a lot of the kind of argumentation surrounding the frontier thesis. A lot of New Deal thinkers understood the United States as reaching the end of the frontier, and then so that they began to socialize. I mean, they basically affixed the word social on all of these old categories: social democracy, social rights, social civilization, social education, social medicine. And so there's different ways of dealing with hitting a wall, and the New Deal and the development of a new ethos of social citizenship was certainly part of the New Deal success. But then the U.S. also hit a wall in the 1970s with Vietnam, and the response to Vietnam and the energy crisis and the limits to growth and all of that politics of scarcity that emerged in the mid to late 1970s. And the response then was Reaganism, was once again restoring a notion of freedom as freedom from restraint. Right, so there was one of Reagan's energy advisors. They asked him what the agenda was, in 1980, and he said the agenda is more, more, more. He's basically, we're going to respond to limits by pretending there are no limits and pushing outward. And Reagan was successful in doing that because he could push into the third world. There was economic nationalists that could be rolled back. There was, he cut taxes, but then jacked up military spending and restructured the political economy of the United States. And that lasted for a while. But now it does seem we've hit another limit. And this one, to me, seems less subjective and more objective. There's the endless war, there's the economic stuff, but then there's the environmental crisis, which seems to me not a matter of interpretation, but it seems to me really the end of the promise of limitlessness. So
if I understand this, when they were looking at in the New Deal, they basically said we found a new frontier, and that frontier is a new America where we perceive we really socialize some of these problems, and we enter into an era where we as a society can tackle things that we, did not as a society had the awareness or the strength or the courage to tackle as a society in some ways, right?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think a lot. I mean, Franklin Delano Roosevelt took classes with Friedrich Jackson Turner, the person who basically cobbled together what we know as the frontier thesis. And Roosevelt was unbelievably skilled at giving like a 2-minute preface of the frontier thesis. And then, that U.S. wealth was based on expansion and being able to move on. And then you could just say, but those days are gone. In like 4 words, he just summed up a whole new political universe, a political sense of possibility and responsibility. And that had a certain durability as far as it went. I mean, we didn't travel quite as far into that new frontier, I think, maybe as some had hoped at that time. But was Reagan's real? In other words, was, like I say, I don't know. People can argue about the durability of the idea of the concept of the New Deal because it's sort of it remained in some ways static for a while, anyways. But was Reagan's a real? I mean, I understand the sales pitch. Was Reagan's a real realignment?
Well, not just a realignment, but was there really a new frontier that Reagan was offering, or was it just simply like, I'm going to pretend there is?
Well, it's a good question, right? I mean, it depends. It depends on what level of interpretation. People would argue. I would argue that Clinton and Obama were clearly working within the limits and framework that Reaganism set up. I mean, Reaganism was fundamentally negative, right? It was a new right organized against prayer in school, against environmentalism, against gay rights, against abortion, against a whole. It was fundamentally negative in nature, but it also, I think Reagan's success and Reaganism's success is that they were able to turn that negativity into what they imagined to be a positive vision of freedom, because it had such deep roots in American political culture. Freedom as freedom from restraint, right? There is no limit.
Government is an obstacle.
I think
government's an obstacle, and we just unshackle ourselves from government.
Yeah, so I think it was fundamentally negative in nature, but I think that its success was that it was able that Reagan and Reaganism was able to transform it into a positive ideology and a new common sense that we're still fighting to break out of in many ways.
In some respects, it was sort of like, we're going to return to the old deal, and
that's what it was. I mean, they were definitely going back to the pre-New Deal vision of freedom as freedom from restraint, as opposed to, I mean, and it's not just FDR, but Rex Tugwell and Harry Wallace and Francis Perkins. They all drew on the frontier thesis to basically critique the frontier thesis and come up with this, yes, a kind of unlimited frontier, or a belief in an unlimited frontier created these realms of political wealth and economic wealth that were unprecedented, but those days are gone, and we now have to kind of create a new ethos of social responsibility, and they call bureaucracy. I mean, the person who was put in front of the National Recovery Administration that was eventually ruled unconstitutional, but it might have been the most radical aspect of the New Deal. He was a general, Hugh Johnson. He called the NRA the new frontier. He was born in Oklahoma, so he knew what the real frontier was. And Hugh Johnson called the NRA the new frontier. This is the frontier now. Government bureaucracy, and he meant it in a positive way.
Right, and we should say the National Recovery Administration, not the
that's what I meant.
All right. Well, so let's talk about how that brings us to the wall, and maybe we need to back up a little bit, at least temporarily, because there are the wall is. There are sort of three elements to the history of this, right? It's like how immigrants. And really, I guess two elements, but maybe three, like the immigrants and the sort of the militarization of the border and the idea of like, we need some type of structure there. Walk us through that history of immigration and how it, interplays with that notion of frontier.
Well, there are these multiple ways of thinking of how we reach this moment, this politics of border brutalism. And one of them is a kind of bipartisan militarization and criminalization of immigration. And without going too thick into the weeds, we went from a system that was relatively open, where there was no frontier. Was no border, and Mexicans came seasonally to work in the Southwest and Midwest cities and Los Angeles and New York, to increasingly that stream being divided into a legal stream through guest worker programs, Seder, and a criminalized stream. And the history of the 20th century in some ways is the growth of the criminalized stream and the turning into a trickle, the legal stream. And there's lots of different markers for this. That Mexico didn't have quotas for a long time about how many visas it could give out, and quotas were finally put on in 1965. But this all goes into your point that there was a kind of bipartisan Republican and Democratic consensus or policy towards militarization of the border. It was very much tied in with NAFTA. NAFTA signed by Bill Clinton into law in late 1993, went hand in hand with some of the most explosive growth of the Border Patrol and the militarization of the border. There's that history, but then there's also the history of the kind of more explicit nativism that comes out of the country's history of white supremacy, and how the border, for even as the frontier was being held up as this venue in which the United States becomes more liberal, moves out into the world, is the symbol of a threshold into the future. The border was concentrating a lot of the racist violence. Obviously, there was racism and Jim Crow laws and in other places in the United States, but certainly one line, one axis of racist violence was the border with Mexico. And the KKK in the 1920s, then again the KKK in the 1970s, a lot of the kind of radicalization and extremism that happens in war, when veterans came back radicalized to the right, would find release on the border or expression on the border. My argument is that has long relatively been contained to the border itself. But what Trumpism, you see a kind of explosion of that, of nationalization of that border brutality.
Before we get to that nationalization of the border brutality, is that like the flip side of the frontier, in the sense that, like, if the idea is that we want this ever increasing pie and we've got to go different places to find it, and sometimes we've got to invent a new pie, as it were, that the idea of immigrants and immigration, they start nibbling away at the pie and make it harder for us to, sort of claim that it's ever increasing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the opposition of polarity that I'm trying for in the book. I mean, the frontier is always at the same time a border, even if it's not talked about as a border. But that, the border, but then the frontier itself becomes this symbol of multilateral universalism, the idea of endless growth, the idea that of a certain kind of liberal universalism. That everybody can sit at the table, that all boats can be lifted, that you can organize politics, and of course there's some truth to this. The United States after World War II does organize becomes an unprecedented world power in which it economically develops the countries that it conquered and defeated, with the idea that you're going to expand capitalism, and the United States will benefit from that expansion. But at the same time, the border is, there's different expressions of nativist racism in the United States, but one of them is certainly directed towards Mexicans, and the border doesn't necessarily become a nationalized symbol of the opposite of frontier universalism until recently, but it has been. That's exactly the tension. What Trump says is there isn't enough to go around. We have to take care of our own. It's a kind of return to what some people call a race realism that has deep currents in U.S. political culture, but has always remained marginal or marginalized. And now we've seen it, and we could talk about why, but it's become nationalized in Trumpism.
Well, yeah, let's talk about why, because I'd also like to talk about, like, what that suggests in terms of what kind of language can recreate. I mean, if we're stuck in this paradigm that Americans need to have this sense, and maybe I guess we saw it, like, with space too on some level, right? But this paradigm that Americans really have to have this sense that there is a frontier for them, even if it's sort of a metaphorical one. But why has that happened? I mean, what do you think has led to that sort of to what Trump has been able to sort of either tap into or promote?
Well, it goes back to the question of Reagan and how Reaganism was a restoration of an old ethos of limitlessness, and the way that that Reaganism continued in different political projects, whether it be what some people call neoliberalism, or some people call neoconservatism, an emphasis on militarism. But in any case, those projects are exhausted. The end of the kind of sense that the U.S. can use its military to not just remake the world, but that remaking itself would provide moral purpose the mission was sanctified, I think reached its limit with Iraq, right? Afghanistan and Iraq, and not just the financially draining, endless war that the United States thrust itself into, but the morally discrediting. There's in the book I kind of index the rise of border militia movements to Abu Ghraib, right? Just around the time, just when the whole kind of project is revealed to be a sham and a fraud on a staggering level. I think another kind of limit is the economic model, the neoliberal model. 2008 was the financial crisis, and was supposedly in a recovery, but it's a perverse recovery. It's stockpiled wealth and revealed inequality and social immobility, and so in both of them, whether it's markets or militarism, the promise of endless growth can no longer be used to kind of organize domestic politics. And then hovering over all of this is climate catastrophe, right? I mean, literally the frontier is on fire. The large, enormous swaths of the West are burning. Insects are disappearing, and bats are disappearing in record numbers. The ocean is acidifying. I think that the real limit that hovers over this is the climate crisis, and that's why I said where some of these other moments of limits were maybe more subjective, or where we seem to be in a moment where there's no going back to that promise of limitlessness as a way to respond to social problems.
So if I understand this, it's almost like we don't have the opportunity for growth. All right, I'm gonna use it like as a metaphor. Is like I can't increase my income, but I can increase my savings. And if I stop expending in this way, and on some level, there's this perception that immigration is some type of expenditure of our bodily fluids, our precious bodily fluids, in some way, as a nation.
So it's tempting to see the wall as some kind of disenchantment of the myth, right? Like it's a better reflection of the way the world works. There really are limits, and the wall is saying that there are limits, and not just that there are limits. That you can't use the promise of limitlessness as a promise for domestic politics. So the wall is a recognition that that not everybody will rise up, not everybody will sit at the table, that we have to take care of our own. But I think that that's only half of the story. I think the wall is its own form of enchantment, right? Because it's a kind of it gives sanction to the kind of petulant cruelty and hedonism that is Trumpism, right? I mean, there's a lot of symbols of this: rolling coal. The idea of just like in the face of the climate crisis, which to me represents a true universalism. We really are all in this together. The response is, I'm going to do whatever I want. We're going to build a wall, and we're going to and then we're going to engage in these acts of cruelty and hedonistic displays of brutality, whether it be against migrant children or families. I mean, there's lots of different ways in which the cultural cruelty of Trump is on display. But I would argue that yes, it's against migrants, and particularly against Mexican and Central migrants, that it's most consistent and most spectacular in a way.
So it's like it's fascinating because it's rare you stop to think about why does the wall, and I guess is what you've done, but why is it so interesting? Like, what's the material benefit that the wall gives to its most ardent supporters? And it sort of feels like the wall and all of what you're talking about, this sort of like cruelty and brutality, it almost gives that same feeling as that classic I've got elbow room here, and an endless sky type of situation.
Yeah. I mean, going back to the days when the Puritans arose, like a sense of aloneness and independence is only predicated on genocide and elimination of the people who are already there. So there's a long history of this. But yes, I think the wall is. I think what is so fascinating about the wall is the way it is. It's the exact opposite of the frontier. I think it taps deep into these cultural symbols and mythologies of U.S. politics, and in some ways, I know a little while ago there was some talk in the media about how Trump just stumbled on the wall. His advisors told him to use it as just a way of remembering something. I mean, I think that undersells the resonance and the way it resonates, within this kind of nativist traditions, which again have always been present. The United States is a expanding settler colonial nation founded on slavery and genocide. So all of that violence is always there, but my argument is that ongoing expansion has kept it on the margins, kept it at the border, so to speak. And now what we're seeing is now that it can no longer be kept at the the violence can no longer be kept on the fringes, is now kind of all consuming national politics and attention.
Greg Grandin, the book is The End of the Myth, From the Frontier to the Border Wall in the Mind of America. It's fascinating stuff. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me on again. Appreciate it. Have a nice day.
You too. All right, folks. That is all the time for our first and free half of our program.
Some frontier thesis.
Yes. It's fascinating that there's that paradox where you would imagine a wall is the opposite of the frontier, but it provides sort of the subtext carries through. Folks, speaking of the final frontier, that is, we have hit a frontier of sorts, or the end of the frontier for some of you. For others, I can offer an expansive frontier.
Some of you are going to hit the wall pretty soon.
Some of you are about to hit the wall. But some of you will continue with us onto the fun half. You can join those in this new frontier by going to jointhemajorityreport.com. Jointhemajorityreport.com for just pennies a day. You can join us in this new world called the fun half. Who wouldn't want to live there? In the fun, where it's fun all the time.
And it's not even settler colonial.
No. It's internet time. So it's completely, it really is untraversed. Also, justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority, get 10% off. Great company. Really care about the farms that provide them with coffee in a way that I don't think any other coffee roaster can or does. And not to mention, it's great coffee. So use the coupon code majority. Go to justcoffee.coop, COOP. Tomorrow night, if Michael recovers, there'll be the Michael Brooks show. This is always, you never know. He always manages to recover by Tuesday. It's interesting.
It's like, yeah, exactly. It's a Michael Jordan flu game every Tuesday.
That's really weird. Really weird. But, you can check out the Antifada. I imagine they're still, their podcasts are still up, despite the fact that they are out of the country. And Matt, who decides to show up, work.
In-person plug.
There you go.
Literary Hangover, we did a short story by Nathaniel Hawthorne called Wakefield. We listened to the full thing. It's about a guy who decides to leave his wife one day and moves across the street so he can just watch her react to his absence over the course of 20 years. And
wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Did he tell her? Does he just disappear?
Well,
just ghost?
I guess I'll just spoil it. He does return.
Well, no, but I'm saying, did he tell her when he
Oh,
left?
no, he said, I'll be back Friday. and he just blew right by that Friday. And then
went out to get cigarettes.
Next 20 years of Friday.
Wow.
Yeah.
And he moved across the avenue.
Yeah, he wanted to be able to see her. And there's at one point where he's like, "Oh, it looks like she's really taking this hard." And there's like a doctor that comes, and then she recovers from that and starts going on with her life.
Oh, good for her. And this guy's just skulking around the neighborhood, I guess, not to be seen.
Yeah, exactly.
Jesus. Sounds like fun. All right, 646-257-3920 is the number. See you in the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just want to degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Almost says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
I am a total cunt.
Can we bring back DJ Dannerky's song, please?
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Dannerky.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break for people.
That's fucking nonsense.
Hey, folks, reminder.
I do not have Parkinson's.
And the alpha males are
Psych. Fuck them.
Almost says what?
Almost
says what?
Hell of a lot of bank. 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 Hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African. And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black.
See Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keep it at 100. Can't knock the hustle. Come on! Fuck them. Fuck things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday! Happy birthday to me, Jew boy!
I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are back. Africans are black.
Come on! Come on! Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total
pussy.
We are back. Sam Seder on the majority of part. It is the fun half, ladies and gentlemen. The fun half indeed. Let's go right to this. It's breaking, folks. John Hickenlooper, former Democratic governor of Colorado, former governor of Colorado, right? He's former governor, right?
Yes.
I think his jumping into this election proves my point that that we're talking about like a very, very low cost, low bar to entry here. Is there something going on with the phones?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I just saw it. Yeah,
okay. And he's either looking for somebody to be somebody's, I guess, VP, although I don't know why someone would pick him as VP. But
Booker Hickenlooper 2020.
Yeah, I guess
been
maybe.
saying it.
But here he is. It is shocking to me. I mean, this is genuinely shocking. I mean, this is almost like the most radical thing I've seen in this election, right? That somebody could actually say this on national television and not be laughed off the stage at this point. I almost think like this is almost like criminal behavior. If you're like you're a Democrat, if we had speech laws in this country, right? This is the type of speech that I think should actually be made illegal. Here is Hickenlooper. He's on what is it?
This week with Stephanopoulos.
This week with Stephanopoulos, and here is his prescription. Here is what he is picking up on what's going on in the country now.
Let's put some meat on the bones. You're elected president. You come in. Mitch McConnell, Republican Mitch McConnell, still the head of the Senate. They still have a majority. What's the first thing you do with him? What can you work on together?
Well, just like anybody, people are responsive to people that they think respect them and they feel heard. I learned this in the restaurant business. When someone's angry, you don't, fight back on them or argue with them. You repeat back their words. And if Mitch McConnell, when I come into office, I would go to Mitch McConnell to his office and I would sit down with him and say, now what is the issue again? And we would talk and I would continue to speak back to him. Sounds silly, right? But this works. This is what I did with the suburban mayors, and they hated the city of Denver. You go to any metropolitan area in the country, the arguments between the big city mayor and the suburban mayors, they're almost endless. We're the one place where this has gotten done, and I think it will work in Washington.
This is such sheer insanity. And now I know there's a market for this from people who don't follow politics and aren't aware that Mitch McConnell made it his lifelong mission on day one to make sure that Obama did not get reelected. Literally said this. Fine. That's your... I certainly have been working to make sure that Donald Trump doesn't get reelected. That Mitch McConnell, who was willing to essentially destroy the Senate so that Trump would get elected in 2016, the naivete. I mean, if he believes it, if he doesn't believe it, then, he's just an all and out liar. But I mean, to actually believe that the problem is somebody hasn't sit down with Mitch McConnell and not called them names.
Or don't feel heard.
Yeah. Was Barack Obama really just that mean of a guy?
I'm going to get in there and I'm going to listen to Mitch McConnell's feelings.
I'm going to
get
sit down,
things done.
right.
Thank you for validating my feelings.
I feel heard.
I guess, well, you can have that Supreme Court pick back.
What were we talking about? Supreme Court?
Listen, you guys can have Clarence Thomas because I feel like I've been listened to today.
Hickenlooper sits down with McConnell. McConnell just breaks into tears. You're the first person who's ever come here and called me Mitch. Let's hug it out.
He goes to take a selfie with him, and Mitch starts crying because no one's ever asked him for a selfie before.
You're the first person to take a picture of me, not ironically.
Let me compose myself.
Oh, my God. I just can't believe. Is he a millionaire?
Yeah, he has a successful chain of craft breweries
I just
and restaurants.
Like literally
in
just
Denver.
went through my head was like, wait a second, who is working on his campaign that is telling him this is, he must have a lot of just his own money. He must be self-financing something, and then boom, that's it, of course.
Yeah, he's telling a similar story to our friend Howard Schultz.
Right.
And this is I don't think it's new, but it's a subcategory that I've been enjoying this time around is business person getting in and telling them how their business practice will be the best way to deal with government. Because I want like a weird business person getting there. I want like a cattle farmer to get in there and be like, well, you see, when I have the cow, I want to stick my hand in its ass and I just grab onto the organs. That's what I'm going to do with it.
Yeah. Government's just like a restaurant.
That's what he said.
Or maybe government's like a coffee shop. Honestly, if I leave this show, like the other job that I feel like I would want would be go to really wealthy people and tell them they should be president and that I'm the guy who can make it happen. Just and see if I could last like 6 months just going like, yeah. Just, I mean, you know what the best part about this would be? If Steve Schmidt is also working for him too. Because at that point you double dip. Calling from a 240 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? Ooh, this is a problem. Hold on, let me see. Let me try that again. That doesn't sound very good, does it?
It's on the fritz. It's like a malfunctioning robot in a Jetsons.
Let's try it one more time here. What was it I say? They went down to the bottom. 240. Calling from a 240 area code. Who's this? 240? 240. We may have a problem with our phones. Calling from a 904 area code. Who's this? Hey. We may not have phone use today, folks. I know Kyle's been working on something.
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report.
That sounds all right.
Sam will be with you shortly.
Bear with us one more second, folks. All right, let's see here. Calling from a 240 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes. Okay, we're back. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, it's Vito from Maryland.
Vito from Maryland. What's on your mind, Vito?
So, I've been thinking.
Okay.
I was wondering if you've heard of this. There's this guy. I guess he's running for president. Andrew Yang.
Oh,
and
vaguely, I think. I'm not sure, but yeah.
So, one of the things that he's proposing, I guess, is this idea of universal basic income.
Right.
And so I guess the idea is people would get $1,000 a month. Anybody between the ages of 18 and 64 would get $1,000 per month. He says this would be paid for using a value-added tax. And I always thought of value-added tax. In other words, basically what he's saying is it's similar to what they do in Alaska. In other words, everybody in Alaska gets a check based on the oil revenue, and since and the rest of us should get a sort of a dividend check based on technological mechanization changes, from corporations like Amazon or Apple or Google. But my question is, I'm not sure how that would apply to a company like Amazon when really they don't really add any value anywhere along the line. I think they just have a platform for people to sell things, right? I don't really understand how a value-added tax would be.
Well, first of all, I don't know what a value-added tax has to do with the dividend from fossil fuel exploration up in Alaska. But my understanding of a value-added tax is that it's basically a consumption tax and that it's pretty regressive. I haven't, for a while there was talk about it, and I think I had read in on it then, but that's what I recall about it. A UBI, I think, is okay if somebody was to just drop it on us, but my fear would be that it would come at the expense of other support structures and other programs that the government runs. That's my concern. If somebody just dropped it in, I would be, I think, fine with it broadly speaking. But There are, automatic economic stabilizers that are still super important. So that's my sense. I'm not sure I follow the value added tax scheme that he's talking about. I'm not sure. But I'll look into it. But did you have a point beyond that?
No, I just was, my understanding of value-added tax was always that, for example, lumber is sold, say, to a furniture manufacturer at $50, right? And then if they pay $50 and they sell it to the furniture company for $100, then the value-added tax would be on the $50 profit on that.
Right,
and
like the stepped-up basis, I guess. The tax on the stepped-up basis.
And right. But I don't see how that would apply to the tech industry the way it does with anything else. I don't know. But
I'm not sure.
Anyway, if you get a chance to look into that,
I will.
Get a chance to look into that. Let me.
Thanks, Vito. I appreciate it.
All right. Tom.
I mean, I suppose I could see you could calculate the value-added tax by some type of sell-through rate. I have no idea. I really don't. But I will maybe look into it. Calling from a 509 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam. It's Ronald Reagan.
Look at you always calling in early these days, Ronald Reagan.
Hit and miss there with the phone system for a second, but you got it figured out. So
right.
Good for you.
Thank you.
Hey, you guys played a clip of Van Jones on Friday?
Yeah, we did.
And you kind of, you talked right over the punchline. He said, I've never seen a bird fly with just a right wing or a left wing, not even in Berkeley.
Right.
Get it?
Yeah, no, I get it because Berkeley's so left-leaning.
That even their birds only left
even their birds need two wings.
People laughed really hard, like out loud at that. And I guess this is what you and Andy are always talking about. I don't understand. It's not a joke. It doesn't make any sense. What is wrong with their brains?
But Reagan, haven't you ever been in a church and the priest is trying to be funny and he obviously is telling jokes, even though they're not funny? Everybody laughs just because it's
we
this
have
is
a
the form
perfect
of a joke.
example of what you're talking about. First of all, there's two types of people who are going to get laughs at CPAC. Okay, one is a lefty who's ostensibly owning, or an ostensible lefty who's ostensibly owning the left, right? And that's by, saying San Francisco values or Berkeley values, right? That's what that joke was. And then there's another, and that is somebody who is just, there's just so much sycophantry there that they'll laugh at anything. Ronald Reagan, I give you Donald Trump Jr. on a panel with Charlie Kirk. What's Donald Trump Jr.'s girlfriend's name?
Kim Guilfoyle.
Oh, yeah, Kim Guilfoyle. She's off of Fox now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And who is the other woman?
There's Jerry Falwell, and do we know?
I think it's Jerry Falwell's wife.
Jerry Falwell and Jerry Falwell's wife. Now, no mention of that Cabana boy, right? Wasn't there a Cabana boy involved in that?
There's a settlement there, I believe.
Oh, there's a settlement involved in that? So they're not, that's not what they're laughing about. Oh, okay. I just wanted to be clear. And here is the joke that Donald Trump Jr. tells. This is, careful, buddy. You don't want to hurt yourself.
3 weeks ago tomorrow, we had our second granddaughter. And like I said a few weeks ago, and her name is Reagan. How presidential is that? Beautiful Reagan Elise.
I lobbied for Trump, but it was a little too soon maybe, so we'll see.
Trump is not the most feminine name, but we can make it.
Hey,
but neither is Reagan,
we're going to take a page out of the liberal playbook. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. We can identify how we want.
Oh, by the way, she is a daughter. She's our granddaughter. And we're raising her as a girl.
She's beautiful.
We're not letting her have a choice. She's what
there
God
will be
designed.
outrage tomorrow that you decided for.
God makes the choice of what the babies are going to be, and God decided she would be a girl.
You don't have to raise them as a girl. She's got a little baby doll right under her arm every second.
Yeah.
And when my boys always had guns in their hands, so we didn't. That's not something.
Hashtag me too.
That's not something you teach them. That's something they're born with. But as far as those cows you mentioned, I've got 100 cows. You just let Alexandria Cortez show up at my house and try to take my cows away.
Yes.
I love cows, Jerry. They're delicious.
I mean, first
I saw
off,
that on a bumper sticker.
First off, let me just
in middle school.
Let me just sort of like I have to say this because I'm just sort of amazed at the just sort of like how rotten to the core these people are. That in some way they're amused by sort of mocking people who are struggling with with establishing their gender identity. Like just sort of like just this sort of it's literally like some like first graders in like 1972. It feels like just sort of like just so just the cruelty of being a child, but just the ignorance that came, just the total ignorance.
This is the comedy equivalent of like pointing a laser pointer in someone's eye.
Yeah, exactly.
Hilarious.
Oh, look at him wink! Look at him blink! He's blinking. He's got to blink now. Oh well, I can barely see. Oh.
Oh God, Don Jr. He gets it. It feels like all of this it's kind of like having a political convention after a long game of telephone where they don't actually know anything, but it's like the issues have been explained over and over again in sort of a superficial way, like through 20 different people, and then the people in the very end of that are the ones that go and talk about these things at the convention. So like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez wants to take away my cows. I'm going to murder her with my gun. As if that's even remotely on the close to reality. But hey, I wanted to ask you real quick. What's your take on Michael Jackson? Total molester, right?
My understanding is that he, that there was some issues, but I haven't watched. Is the documentary come out yet? What is the newest news about this?
I think part 1 came out last night, right?
Yeah.
And there's a lawsuit ongoing.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't see it.
I'm going to watch it tonight.
But I mean, my sense is that there was a real problem.
More
with
like
this guy.
Wacko Jacko, right?
Right. Yeah. No, Wacko Jacko.
Because he's weird.
Yeah.
All right.
Appreciate the call.
All right.
Thanks.
Yep.
Oh, jeez. Let's go to some IMs here. Stiff. Okay, something's terribly wrong with the audio on the phone line. I think we got that fixed. Fram from Philadelphia. Sam, have you read Doug Henwood's critique of MMT and Jacobin? You know what? I have not. I have pulled it. I have it. I intend to read it. Winnipeg Craig. Sam, if you don't stop wasting money on s'mores, Pop-Tarts for Matt and Brendan, I'm canceling my membership.
Those are Matt's. I would never eat those.
Oh, why? Do you have Pop-Tarts? Matt
They're s'mores Pop-Tarts.
We should actually create a little just area, specific shrine for the garbage that you're eating for breakfast that day. Like Pop-Tarts are actually at least like a genre of breakfast food.
Cereal, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, they're horrible, but usually it's like a candy bar or M&Ms or something like that.
Snickers is borderline.
I feel like you eat much worse than when you started here.
Yeah, that's possible.
Bakefield. Sam, Matt, is it possible that Michael's at a podcast studio across the street, high as a kite, watching the show to see how you get on without him? JJ Cool. Hey, Sam, what do you think of the moneyed interests of the Democratic Party have a strategy to upset the Bernie campaign by targeting very specific areas of his platform? On a macro level, Bernie's platform would bring structural change that is unmatched by any challenger. Instead, you have different candidates or commentators drilled down into things like reparations, gun control, costs, etc. Basically death by 1,000 cuts, if you will. I mean, it's fascinating to me to see the fervor in which people are want to know Bernie's reparations plan. And I mean, I think he's probably got to come up with a more sufficient answer, but just because that seems to be attacked. But I don't think it's hugely relevant. I mean, this happened yesterday. And, you know, look, I think there may be a little bit too much made of the nefarious nature of this. But the problem is that, and it is the case, MSNBC, I don't know that there's a contributor on staff who is more Bernie friendly than I. Maybe there is, but I'm not aware of them. And for the most part, there are people who come off of campaigns. I've never done that, so I don't have any sort of like, pre-stated bias, or I should say, professional bias. Let's put it that way. And Zerlina is a perfectly nice person, but I think like MSNBC owes it to its viewers to offer full disclosure as to where people are if they are predisposed, and also if you make a mistake, that's this blatant, you should fix it. And here is Zerlina Maxwell on MSNBC saying that Bernie's speech about at his opening rally lacked any reference to race or gender except for 23 minutes in. And here it is.
But we didn't broadcast it.
I know.
But look, there were a couple times that you had a couple eye rolls, and just explain your thoughts as you were listening to Bernie Sanders.
Look, I work for Hillary Clinton, so I have a lot of opinions.
That was it, right there.
All right, pause it. So, I mean, at least there's that full disclosure up front, right? I worked for Hillary Clinton.
Right there.
Bernie Sanders. But, to be very serious about it, I clocked it. He did not mention race or gender until 23 minutes into the speech. And just for point of comparison, I went back and looked at Elizabeth Warren's opening speech, for example. She mentions race and discrimination in the first paragraph. So that's a big difference. And as somebody who is a black woman, knowing that black women are going to be a core constituency for any Democrat who hopes to win the nomination, I was looking to hear messaging specifically for my community, and I did not, at least until 23 minutes into the speech. A lot of what Bernie Sanders is said today, we've heard before, right? Mm-hmm. His economic messaging, I could probably quote it to you, Alex, but I think that what was missing was sort of a building upon that economic message, where he's fully understanding that those economic messages intersect with other policy problems that people of color and women have to deal with. And so until he comes up with specifics in terms of policy to address those issues, I think that he's still going to have a problem in this crowded field and a Democratic primary that's going to rely on those constituencies. I do think that the message obviously resonates with a large swath of the Democratic primary electorate, and I think that it's not taking anything away from Bernie Sanders. There are a lot of people that support Bernie Sanders. The problem for him is that message was not enough in terms of the math to win the last time, and he has not tweaked it to win over voters that he needed and that he will need in 2020.
Right. Now, I think Zerlina has a very good point, and even a better one if it was true. Now, I want you to think about issues of race. And look, it's his first speech. He didn't lay out any specific proposals on anything, really. Right? I mean, people rarely do in that opening speech. It's just not where you start to go through a litany of specific detailed proposals. But what would be the issue sets that are involved in particular in terms of race? Things like maybe criminal justice reform, things like voting rights. Incidentally, Bernie went to Selma the next day. I think there may have been one or two other candidates there. Preceding Bernie was Representative Terry Alexander, was Sean King, and Nina Turner. 3 speakers, African Americans all. And there was also a guy from one of the Pennsylvania strikers, union guy. Within the first 3 minutes, he talked about criminal justice reform. In 6 minutes, he talked about fighting Trump's sexism and racism. In 13 minutes, he talked about mass incarceration. And that first sentence really, I mean, you know, you got a couple of minutes up front of like, thank you for being here. I'm happy to be here. I went to college here. He literally went to college there. That type of stuff. But as soon as he starts talking about any substance, the first thing out of his mouth is about sexism and racism. And he says, you know, we have this inequality, and it's not just income. It's not just in terms of economics. It's in terms of, and now you could say it wasn't sufficient, but to add that level of specificity and to have clearly not listened at the beginning is what happened. You got to come out and apologize. And I think she did on Twitter, but it was still sort of like, well, but I don't really consider criminal justice reform to be a racial issue. It's a very narrow definition of racial issues. And all he said was sexism and racism. Like, I don't, you know, this was sprinkled throughout his speech. And I think in a very conscious way, because this was a deficit for him in 2016. He started his campaign not thinking he was running for president, but thinking he was only going to message on the issues of wealth inequality and the plutocracy and how it impacts our elections. And then it was very hard for him to pivot as his election went on. And so I think her critique, I mean, in terms of like what he needs to do in this campaign is correct, but I don't know that for Zerlina in particular, that he's ever going to be able to achieve that bar because they may not be listening closely enough to him. And she wrote back, I've rewatched since yesterday, and while I can acknowledge that I missed the passing line at 6 minutes, I mean, I don't know what the difference is between the first sort of substantive remarks that you have outside of, and it being a passing line. It was a passing line because she passed it. I stand by my point, since talking about criminal justice is not the same thing as talking about race and gender. And if you don't get why Bernie won't win again, I mean, it's just not the case. He said sexism and racism. So I think there are legitimate critiques that Bernie needs to continue to work on this. But frankly, when you make those kind of critiques and they're not legitimate, you hurt your own cause. And I think, you know, in this instance, Zerlina's cause is doesn't want Bernie to win the primary. And, you know, I understand that. There are people, I don't know who Zerlina supports, but there are people that I would prefer not win the primary too. You just got to be careful about what you attribute to them. Let's go back to the IMs here. Water Boat from Kashmir. Good afternoon, Majority Report. Thank you for an amazing show you guys do every day. Your integrity is what I find attractive, even when, on a remote occasion, I disagree with you. You have helped me remain sane and seriously actually help my mental health. I am sure I'm not the only one. Thank you. I can't justify becoming a member yet, even though I work. I am in school, but you will have a new member in 15 months. I live on coffee these days, and I find that Just Coffee is actually cheaper than buying coffee outside. I recommend cold brewing. Saves time and ton of money. Yeah, we should get some cold brew going in here. That's what I want to do. Because I don't like the too hot coffee when it comes out.
We can do that.
Let's do that. Thank you. And as a reminder, if you are a member or you want to be a member and you have trouble affording a membership, send us an email at majorityreporters@gmail.com. We will hook you up. No one is locked out because of cash. JB, it's pronounced John Frackenlover. Corey11, hi Sam. Hickenlooper is a great name for a quirky shop owner from a musical in the early 50s. Denver Dave, Hickenlooper running for cabinet office, DOL, Department of Education, or Department of Commerce, maybe EPA to keep fracking safe for militant centrist party. Jeffrey, when will Super Hickenlooper, an ex-state trooper, admit he drove a Mini Cooper? Hammondgate, what do you think about Bernie's federal job guarantee plan? Yeah, I mean, that's actually, I think, a big deal. I need to dig more into it, and he mentioned it. I think it's huge. I think it'd be helpful. I think we need a tremendous amount of improvement of our infrastructure, and I mean that in the broadest of sense. And what better way than paying for it, paying workers to build it and build it out. Bullprog. The trope against millennial snowflakes needing a participation trophy meets its match with the story of Trump's Nobel Prize nomination being forged. I will check that out.
I mean, the free speech stuff they're always on is just participation trophy, but for speech. Like everybody's take, even if it's racism, should get a hearing.
Right. Human brain. A while ago, I seem to remember there was a libertarian study about the effect of regulation on business economy showing pretty much none. Do y'all recall what it was? I've been chipping away at that one with my good friends to bring them back to reality. Love y'all. Please continue doing what you do, or I may have to cancel my membership. Also, Andrew Yang did an AMA on Reddit the other day. Maybe a good for y'all to get the gist of his ideas. I don't think he has much viability as a candidate. Seb Gorka's business card. Sam, last week you said there was no momentum for Klobuchar. I would argue there's a lot of momentum in the binder flying towards her interns. Bo Fett. Didn't AOC and some other Congress people to do that, but Mitch was on the lam in some flop house somewhere? I guess that was to go by. Calling from an 847 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, it's Josh from Chicago.
Josh from Chicago. What's up, Josh?
Oh, hi, Sam. I've missed you.
Oh, well, I've missed you, Josh. It's great to hear from you.
I know. I've really missed you. I wanted to actually talk about the Bernie, that comment on MSNBC, and also I was at the Bernie rally.
I was too. I didn't see you.
I was on stage, actually. Not that I'm a big deal or anything.
Whoa, excuse me.
Yeah, I was on national TV. I mean, I thought his speech was really good. I think he did talk about race, and I think what the person on MSNBC said, she was clearly shifting, like moving the goalposts, and she clearly is someone who won't vote for Bernie, which, you know, everyone can decide who they want to vote for. My thing is on this, and I, again, liked a lot of what he said in his speech, and also in his Chicago speech. I think he talked about race and also housing stuff in a really good way that will be effective in a place like New York. I do think we, especially as white Bernie supporters, should make an effort to be a little less defensive when people of color have actual criticisms of Bernie when he talks about race.
I agree. I mean,
I think that will help us.
Well, I think, listen, you know, and I've been saying this for 2.5 years since the BLM folks, you know, went on stage at Netroots Nation, that Bernie needs to learn to talk about these things in a more inclusive way, that I think is, in some respects, you know, maybe generational. He's not as sensitive to it. But I also think in terms of
from Vermont,
from Vermont and the language, but I mean, he has a long history in the civil rights movement. And I think he's doing better, and I think he's got to do better. But I mean, you know, he's certainly walking the walk, I think, you know, and I think he's definitely trying. So, and, you know, I mean, I think, but I agree with you. I think there's got to be a lot less defensiveness about it because, you know, it's okay to concede that he has work to do there and can do it, because I think the idea is that, you know, he's earnest. And And certainly the policies he's talking about are going to help, but he seems also to be aware that there's not just an economic solution to the problem of race and sexism in our society.
Yeah, and I think the reason why I bring that up in particular is because I noticed a lot of people criticizing Mark Lamont Hill, who has sometimes criticized Bernie. And I think one of the things that we have to realize is that there are some people, like black people, who might be undecided, who might think, oh, that was a little insensitive of Bernie, or he's not talking about race in a specific way, and we just when we get defensive, we turn these people off from voting for him. And
it's also wrong to get that defensive about it, frankly. Yeah, I mean, in addition to it being unhelpful, it's also just wrong, right? Like I'm sure there are some white people that exist that have a full awareness of all they need to understand in terms of race. And I'm sure there are some men who have a full awareness of all they need to understand in terms of the experience of women in this country. But I don't know them. And I'm certainly not one of them. And they're so few, unless that they all are, they're the only people on Twitter, then we shouldn't hear from them. People should keep an open mind to this stuff. That's important, outside of the context of the race, just in general. First reaction should not be defensiveness.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It shouldn't.
Absolutely. Can I also just make a quick point? Did you read the Cynthia Nixon op-ed that she wrote?
No.
Because you were talking about Hickenlooper, who I think is a joke. But he's talking about bipartisanship. She wrote this against the Joe Biden comment he made about calling Mike Pence a decent guy.
Yeah.
But there's something in there. I'm just going to quote directly, and I think this is also directly about what you're talking about, how the foolishness of bipartisanship. The problem in legitimizing an agenda is legitimizing an agenda of hateful discrimination. And she says basically, there's a sense among genteel Washington that partisanship is rude and boorish. But when you're fighting for the rights of marginalized communities who are under attack, it's okay to stop being polite. This is not a time for hollow civility. She was talking about Biden, but in particularly, this is the message that resonates with people and not the Hickenloopers of the world and the Bidens of the world. Yep. And I think she nailed it in that article, and it was a direct response to Pence, but it's kind of what we've all been saying for years, that the Republican Party is just a racist party, and there's no point in trying to find common ground with them.
I mean...
on stuff you can't find common ground.
Yeah, exactly. I appreciate the call, Josh. Calling from a 904 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? 904.
Hey, Sam. This is Adam from Florida.
Hello, Adam. What's on your mind?
First off, I just want to say I called in last week and spoke to Michael about the differences between Sanders and Warren on their idea of the filibuster, and I was glad to see that you also did a segment, I think it was maybe the next day, kind of giving your 2 cents, so I was happy to hear that. My real question today is about this national emergency nonsense that's going on right now.
Right.
Before that, before Trump actually officially declared the national emergency, people were saying, that a positive side effect could be that a Democratic president could declare a national emergency on something real, like climate change.
Right.
I didn't really understand why, like, a President Bernie would need to have a precedent set in order to do that, but, like, I guess that's
it's the reappropriation of funds that is the issue here, right? It's one thing to say I can declare a national emergency, but the other is like that I can declare it in such a way that I now have authority to reappropriate funds that Congress has not. Well, there's two different levels to this, right? It's one thing is if Congress hasn't even addressed it. We've never taken up the question of and we haven't specifically not funded climate change or whatever it is. In this instance, Congress specifically took up the question of funding the wall and decided not to. And so the president is saying that we have a national emergency. And then you have a couple of questions there, like, is this really a national emergency? Even if it was, is it appropriate to reauthorize funds in this manner, reappropriate funds in this manner, specifically when Congress has basically determined it's not a national emergency, right? Like even the argument would be really hard. Like there's no material difference between the day that Congress voted against funding the wall and the day that Trump said, we have a national emergency, so I'm going to reappropriate funds to fund the wall. There's no material difference. Right. It's not like, last week they voted against building a seawall for New York, and this week a huge storm surge, put half of New York underwater, right? Like there's not that situation here. So that's why you need that precedent on some level that to be set for having such a low bar, and not just a low bar, but a bar that runs contrary to what Congress has actually decided on this very issue.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. But now, like on the idea of precedent setting, I'm a little worried now that we have all these politicians coming together to. I mean, like that whole idea kind of got me on the bandwagon of like, okay, screw it, give the guy his national emergency so that we can do something real later.
Well, I mean, first of all, I wouldn't invest too much in Democrats doing that. I mean, the idea that you have some Democratic senators who are like, we should reestablish the filibuster for Supreme Court justices right after this is just insane. That's the natural tendency of a Democratic lawmaker. And I imagine this is going to get tied up in the courts. But so I don't know. I wouldn't invest too much in this one way or another. Let me put it that way.
Yeah. I just, I'm thinking, if we do cancel the national emergency,
it's not going to cancel the national emergency. It's not going to cancel the national emergency because he's going to veto this bill, and I don't think they're going to override the veto. So it's going to end up in the courts.
Okay.
Appreciate
what do you think our chances are that we can take back the Senate with the next election? Are there actual chances where we can have all three houses after this election, you think?
It's possible. I mean, I hope, but, we'll see. I mean, I think it's going to be close, frankly. Appreciate the call. Calling from a 419 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, Sam. This is Mike. I'm calling from Detroit.
Mike from Detroit. What's on your mind?
I'm calling. I'm a long-time listener, long-time member, and I love your show.
Thank you, Mike.
Say that off the top. I'm calling about a couple of things that have happened the past week, and they're pretty minor. But the first is last night I was playing poker and sitting at a table of 10 middle-aged men who decided to start talking about Trump because his CPAC thing came up. So about 8 of them were like just in love with Trump, in love with what he has to say. Here's a couple of quotes. Just let him build the damn wall. He's the president. He's a real man. They lost, and now they're trying to take away his rights. So this was the level of discourse there. I decided not to engage because I just wanted to take their money anyway.
Maybe record them next time.
It was pretty. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
You could record them surreptitiously next time.
Well, never mind surreptitiously. If you dropped the microphone in there, and that was a podcast, just like this conversation of 8 Trump supporters, I
would listen.
I would listen to that. I find that endlessly fascinating.
Just go to a poker room and sit at a table. Bring them up. They'll just start going off.
Wow.
It was nuts. And you know what occurred to me sitting there was that there is nothing in the world that will convince these guys. Nothing in the world that will show them that this man does not have a single interest their interests at heart at all. You know, there was Latinos, there were blacks, there were working class whites, union members. They were all there, and they were all just in love with him.
Wow. Completely complete mix of race and what about, but all working class guys?
Yeah, absolutely. I bring this up because I received a fundraising text from Bernie campaign this week, and I started to engage with the guy a little bit because I love Bernie. I love everything he stands for. I worked for him I campaigned for him. I donated to him. I bought a damn T-shirt. I was all in for Bernie. And then when he lost, I switched and went over to Hillary. I'm not going to engage this time with Bernie, and I'm not going to support him this time because I was so upset with the ways that we could not turn Bernie supporters to actually support their candidate. And I don't think that
what percentage
we can trust them again.
What percentage of Bernie supporters do you think supported Hillary?
You know, it's probably a high percentage, but I will tell you, with my Bernie friends on social media and in my workplace, they were so vitriolic against Hillary. They were so horrible online and in public about Hillary and her campaign. I just couldn't. It was horrible. I all the effect of that and the ways that they might persuade other people just to decide not to vote or to decide to vote for Jill Stein or whomever. I don't know what kind of effect that has overall, but it's pretty nasty, and I think it had some effect.
I mean, it may have had some effect, but it certainly wasn't inconsistent with what we've seen in the past. In fact, I think more Clinton voters from the 2008 primary abandoned Obama than Sanders supporters. Now,
that may be true.
It's not an apples to apples comparison because there was a decent amount of non-Democratic voters who voted for Sanders, but in some respects that makes it even a more stark difference. I mean, all I can tell you is that I wouldn't predicating your support on a candidate based upon, sort of your anecdotal perspective of some of his supporters, I don't think is the wisest way in which to assess who should be the next president, frankly.
Oh, well, so I will absolutely support him if he earns the candidacy. I just can't. I don't want to support him early. I don't think we can trust the Bernie supporters who don't understand the idea of a two-party system.
Who
I think a lot of the
who
Bernie
are you going to support?
I will probably hold off, but Warren is, I think, the most obvious choice at this point.
Fair enough.
I think one other thing. I think Bernie supporters believe many of the Bernie bros believe that the power of their arguments are going to allow them to win. The guys at the poker table will not be persuaded by the arguments, and I think we only.
Well, I got news for you. Those guys at that poker table are not going to vote for Elizabeth Warren either. They're not going to vote for Kamala Harris.
I think we can't win by expecting people to wake up. I think we can only win by motivating young people and women and people of color to get out and vote.
I mean, the bottom line is in Michigan and in Wisconsin, in particular, you need to motivate people of color to come out and vote. That's when Democrats win. I mean, that's just the bottom line. I mean, I think there's obviously a significant, particularly in Wisconsin, but also in Michigan, a lot of voter intimidation and suppression that I think we won't see the same amount. And maybe a visit or two to those states by the Clinton campaign could have made a difference. It certainly wouldn't have hurt, I don't think. But
I agree.
You got to motivate African Americans to come out and vote in the numbers they traditionally vote in, over these presidential elections. And then, I think the strength of frankly, of women who have become now a massive driver of our elections, at least in 2016. Excuse me, 2018. And yeah, I don't think we're ever going to convince your buddies sitting around that poker table. No. But and so that shouldn't be the bellwether. But I think, look, I think your remarks are a cautionary tale. You know, for somebody who donated and worked for Bernie's campaign, to be disillusioned by some of the people that you were working with, I can understand that. I'm not necessarily. I don't think that's necessarily the best way to vote for a candidate by assessing the worst elements of their supporters. But I guess, at least Elizabeth Warren, I think, is sort of consistent in terms of her politics. I appreciate the call.
Thanks, Sam.
Thanks. I think, let's say, having white supremacists support you is a little bit disqualifying, or that should be a first, flag. That's one of the problems that Donald Trump has. But he also has a lot of other problems, like outwardly courting these people. I don't know if Bernie Sanders in some ways outwardly courts, dead enders and
irony bros.
Yeah, but
numbers on the Hillary McCain defections as opposed to the Bernie Hillary defections, it's
25%, right?
25%.
Where is that? Do you
John Sides wrote a piece in WAPO last year about it.
Okay.
And
One in four
from a few polls aggregation.
Okay.
Where was Bernie's at?
Bernie's was at
12%
for 2 polls and 6% for another.
Twice as good.
Now that's Democrats, right?
Yes.
So there was also a percentage of Bernie voters who were not Democrats, who may also not have voted for Clinton. And maybe those people voted for Obama. But in terms of delivering Democrats,
well, and any of the non-Democrats that Bernie actually did eventually deliver for Hillary are like dessert,
that's
right?
bonus, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's a very, I just think if you don't vote for a candidate because you find their supporters on Twitter to be obnoxious, you need to take a step back and say, why am I supporting a specific candidate? Like, on some level, that's just as performative as some of the idiots who are like, I'm going to teach the Democrats a lesson and I'm going to shoot myself in the foot.
This is not beanbag.
This is not beanbag. This is not beanbag. Somebody mentioned, do you think we're going to carry the Senate in 2020? It's going to be tough. Part of the reason is we're probably going to lose a senator in Alabama. Now, I don't know for sure. Doug Jones got in there. It was a special election. And he's up for re-election, I believe, in 2020, if I'm not mistaken. But good for him while he's in there to go on Face the Nation, just as the Democrats in the Senate and the House have introduced a bill to provide a new formula for Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, which essentially gutted the Voting Rights Act when the Supreme Court ruled that there was no proof that these formerly racist states are still racist. And then, of course, like literally within months, there was proof that half of them were racist again via lawsuits and whatnot in terms of their voting restrictions. But here is Doug Jones basically saying we need to reinstitute the Voting Rights Act.
About backsliding, that's the phrase you use.
Yep.
Particularly on the voting rights of
no
minorities
question.
these days. Who do you blame for that?
Well, I think it's a combination of things. I mean, I think that we've had some losses in the courts, but I also think it's a political power grab right now where people are trying to gerrymander districts, where people are trying to prevent people to the right to vote, give them free access to the vote. We need to be expanding the voter rolls and trying to get people to the vote. We need to be pushing the percentage of Americans up who want to vote on Election Day. And instead, we seem to be working, and the powers that be seem to be constricting that. And I think we've got to change that. There's a new bill pending right now, introduced last week on the voter enhancement, try to put some teeth back in the Voting Rights Act.
Who do you blame for this?
Well, I think if you look at carefully, you have to look at the state legislatures, governors, and members of Congress that are Republicans. For whatever reason, they do not want African Americans and other minorities to vote. I assume rather than trying to get those votes, they seem to want to restrict those votes. And I think that that's incredibly unfortunate. We need to have more dialogues in this country rather than monologues. And then we can do it about Voting Rights Act. We talk a good game about everybody having a right to vote and a duty to vote. But at the end of the day, we seem to be working to try to restrict that, and that's just wrong.
I mean, he's got to do a lot of we and the powers that be and this and that, but when he got push came to shove, he was willing to call out exactly who, and everybody knows it. I mean, they don't put it in their platform, but they certainly, every Republican intellectual has said, like, we do better when there's no voting. Yeah, that Wisconsin lawmaker was like, oh, this voter suppression, this is going to get us 1 or 2 points in the general election. Guess what? It did.
Pretty important ones, too.
Yeah. What was the difference in Wisconsin? 7,000 or 12,000? In the presidential election? 22,000 in Wisconsin? Are you sure about that? Oh, yeah, it was. I'm sorry. It was 12,000 in Michigan. 22,000, that's chump change. Brigetti, didn't AOC and some other Congress people to do that, but Mitch was on the land. Oh, right, okay. Angel, Matt's impressions on point lately. Is that why Michael keeps calling in sick? Is he at home writing some new material? Get it, Matt. My new favorite MR impressionist. What's that, Michael who? PDX Tony. I'm pretty confused about MMT. I heard Stephanie Kelton debate an Obama White House economist on Ezra Klein's podcast, and it was a bit demoralizing, honestly. I'm wondering if you paid any attention to the left fights going on about it. Matt Brunig and Doug Henwood both opposed MMT as a format for payment of big social programs. Has your sense of the usefulness of MMT changed at all over the last few months? Look, I think it's gone a long way in terms of empowering and emboldening Democrats from not worrying about how we're going to pay for things. And as the sort of, I don't know how much of it can be attributed to just Donald Trump stepping in and blowing up the whole, got to be afraid of the deficit or what, but I think part of it is also MMT. I think, well, I've got to read these pieces by Henwood, to be honest with you. But the bottom line is, I think we should have taxation of wealth, largely to be confiscatory, largely because of the implications of the political power that is so out of balance. But it's good to know that we don't need to tax to spend.
Yeah, I think it's good in that it helps you avoid the national debt issue. I think it's bad when it is used by people to avoid the military-industrial problem and the problem of how rich people have too much money.
Right. John Spiegler is a cuck. Thoughts on Debbie Wasserman Schultz coming out of her dungeon to criticize Ilhan Omar? Your good pal David Cross had some nice choice words. I didn't see her do that, but I mean, give me a break. Give me a break. Farmer Gillian, as a former Colorado, yes, that's how it's spelled, Coloradan, Hickenlooper is just another flavor of Howard Schultz centrism. He's been widely criticized for butting up with the fracking industry in Colorado, which has been horribly devastating throughout the state. At the 2017 Democratic National Convention, fracking protesters shouted Hickenlooper down at a Politico event, confronting him on stage. Plus, he's best buds with anti-choicer former Ohio Governor John Kasich. Ugh.
Hickenlooper Kasich, 2020.
Unity ticket.
Do we have video? Give me a break. Honestly, Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Give me a break. She was universally hated by both the Clinton and the Obama people. They
Why
just
is
were
this
too
back
lazy
on?
to get rid of her?
Why is this back on Ilhan? I thought like the news was there was a West Virginia legislature, like a poster of Ilhan being an enemy of America.
Right.
And now we're talking about Ilhan rhetoric again.
Right. Well, I guess like Engel from New York brought it back up in some weird way. Mia, Hickenlooper, hell no. I'm done with warm, fuzzy, always negotiating Democrats. Grudge to Tugger Carlson. Jane Mayer is an important new piece in New York, filling in the depth of coordination between the White House and Fox News. Yeah, I'm going to check it out. Deep fried globalist. Bernie had an awful interview on The Breakfast Club. He said he opposed reparations and couldn't name a single bill that he benefited black people. Oof. Might want to take back the credit you gave to Zerlina Maxwell. Now she's on Twitter calling Sean King not a friend to black people. Oh, my God.
I think Bernie's specific answer was he is supportive of reparations in the way Cory Booker and Kamala Harris have been saying they're supportive in like general programs that redistribute wealth. But he said he opposes cash transfer.
Oh. MR member. You should forward members' emails complaining about too much Bernie to John from San Antonio. Calling from a 954 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, my name is Cheney. I'm calling from Dania Beach.
Okay.
This is a first-time caller, so I'm a little bit nervous. Sorry.
You're doing fine.
So, I love you guys. I'm going to become a member because you guys just mentioned that if you email you guys, I only get paid $15 an hour.
Send us an email.
I will. But the one thing that I've noticed, because I like to comment on like YouTube a lot, is that a lot of people like have a lot of like disgruntled hate towards atheism for like I don't know why. Probably because of like, you know, Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson and all that. But I know it's not your guys' responsibility. There are some good atheists out there.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely. I consider myself, like half the room just raised their hands. I consider myself largely one. I mean, I don't feel too strongly because like in the same way that I don't feel too strongly that there isn't, you know, an Easter bunny. I mean, I can certainly understand, you know, I understand the desire for there to be a God. And I also think that it's sort of, you know, you can believe in God and it can be perfectly fine for all of your fellow citizens and human beings. The problem is when there's a certain amount of fundamentalism, I think things get a little bit problematic. So I mean,
exactly.
I'm surprised to hear that there's like animosity towards the idea of being atheist as opposed to some specific branded new atheist. I mean, you know, like they tend to be, it seems to me, more anti-religion than they are anti, you know, people who believe in God. And I just think it's like the idea of saying to people like, it's silly for you to, you know, to actually get emotionally invested in the idea that other people believe in God just seems to me to be, that's your religion, right? Like,
exactly.
I don't care.
Like, a lot of people are confrontational about it, but I just want like, you know, a little bit of like separation of church and state. You can believe what you want to believe.
I want
that, but
plenty of separation of church and
people
state.
To, like, have science classes that are inaccurate.
Right. I think it's just bizarre.
But, like, I was called, like, a Nazi and other shit on, like, YouTube. And I'm like, of course this is YouTube and not. I'm trying to have, like, a productive conversation about how, like,
good luck.
Humanism is, like, not just, like, a religious thing. It's, like, just a human nature. We want to be good to people. And democracy promotes that. And I believe socialism promotes that a lot, too.
Yeah. Here's my advice. Don't try to have too deep or legit conversation on YouTube. That's my advice to you.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's always good advice.
Appreciate the call. Thanks, man. Send us an email.
Yeah, love you
Send
guys.
us an email.
We will. I will.
Right.
So will my fiance.
Great.
Thank you.
Calling from a 203 area code. Wonder what godless ceremony they're going to have to get married.
Hi, Sam. This is Will from Connecticut.
Hello, Will from Connecticut.
So I had two things I wanted to talk to you about, or kind of vanity point and a serious thing.
Yeah.
So I go to a bit of a more right-wing school, Virginia Tech, and we've been blessed, shall I say, with appearances from both Steven Crowder and Charlie Kirk.
Wow.
And just a interesting thing I noticed about them, their appearances, though, was for some reason they seem to be very under-advertised, with posters for them only going up the day of the event. So it seems like, no one can really plan to, maybe go there and cause a bit of a ruckus.
Right. Well, they also don't need, they're so heavily subsidized, they don't necessarily need big attendance at these things.
So the other thing I wanted to ask was, so my representative, Jim Hines, is chair of the New Democrats coalition. Lovely. I wanted to know if you had any thoughts on trying to push someone like him to be further left and, say, co-sponsor the Green New Deal legislation, or if you think the solution there is just to support a primary challenge.
It's always to support a primary challenge, because that will have that impact.
Okay, all right. Well, that's about all I had, so thanks.
Right. Appreciate the call.
Well, if you want to, I guess one way to try and convince someone like Jim Hines, who comes from a financial background, is to talk about all the investment opportunities there are for banks in the Green New Deal.
Right. But they know where they're landing on these things. It's purely, the calculation's more limited. Oh, folks. Oh, big news. Now, I hate to do another entire episode of this program dedicated to Brandon Straka. But he put some of his hundreds of thousands of dollars that he's earned through his highly unsuccessful walk away campaign. And now, to be fair, I think he did get a couple hundred or maybe millions of videos sent to him saying they were walking away. But they must have been all lying, because we know in the last election, after the first full year of operations with walk away, we know that the Democrats got more votes than they ever have in the history of a midterm. And they won in terms of votes. Granted, I know Brandon didn't work on gerrymandering or redistricting. That was not his. He wanted to just get single bodies, individuals, to walk away from the Democratic Party and not vote for them. I think he wanted them just to walk into the wilderness, but apparently they didn't. They walked back to the voting booth because Democrats got more votes relative to the Republicans, who also, I think, had a very good turnout. It means the Democrats must have done that much better than in any midterm election since forever. So based on that, in the wake of that success, he was voted to CPAC. He was
sometime after Diamond and Silk.
Right. He came up after Diamond and Silk, and he brought the really hilarious comedic relief.
Good morning, Patriots. Good morning, Rebels. Did you ever?
Wait a second, pause it. Wait a second. Where is that coming from?
It's him. I was so hoping you guys would pick up on that.
Wait. At first, I thought
He's
that was
so
you,
excited.
man.
No,
He's so
it's
excited.
him.
He can't even control himself. Does he know that this was getting picked up on microphone? Rebels.
Good morning.
Oh my God.
Morning, Patriots. Good morning, Rebels. Did you ever dream that you'd see the day that it would be an act of rebellion because you want to make America great again? Because you want to keep America great? You know what's amazing right now is God is picking rebels and putting them in positions of power right now. We have the greatest rebel in the world running this country right now.
Thank you, Brandon.
Such a rebel.
I think since the day I could talk, I've always been a rebel. From as far back as I can remember, I've always felt a great compulsion to defend the underdog, to befriend the outcasts, to not worry my head too much about the need to fit in. I didn't know then how these qualities would end up one day informing my decision to start what has now become a cultural and political phenomenon.
Pause it. Yeah, the cultural and political phenomena that has swept the country and actually created even more votes for Democrats than at any time in the history of midterm elections. Mm-hmm. Woo.
Behind every great rebel is a mind that sees the world not just for what it is, but for what it could and should be. To never accept the status quo. Certainly not because it's the easy thing to do. It's the driving passion for change that tells the rebel to
hundreds of thousands of dollars, incidentally, this guy has earned.
I'm just imagining a disembodied mind floating behind.
There's a disembodied mind that's just going ching, 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 ching. This guy raised something like $300,000, and he said it went towards a gala thing that they charged like $150 per plate or something. I mean, he's just rolling in the dough.
Took a quick class at the Bill Burton School of Phraseology for political movements.
Exactly.
For change that tells the rebel to disrupt the establishment and to never, ever take no for an answer. It is the need to always be true to one's core values and oneself, to always think independently. Growing up gay in the 80s and 90s in a Catholic Nebraska farm community, being an independent thinker wasn't even really a choice. I was just one lonely, outspoken advocate for the gay community, and I suffered the repercussions of being that weird guy as a result.
Pause it. You know what the beauty of this is that all of the people sitting in that room, if they're over the age of like 25, were actively responsible for making sure that he felt like that outcast at that time. Like, to a person, they were in some way advocating or promoting to make sure that that kid living, in the 80s and 90s felt like an outcast and was literally on the receiving end of peer pressure and bullying to conform. So he should at least thank them for making him such an independent thinker.
Weird guy as a result. After high school, I ran as fast as I could to New York, and I quickly fell in with a very liberal crowd. I mean, after all, these were gay people in New York City, so it was kind of like shooting liberal fish in a Democrat barrel.
Pause it. What does that mean? I guess shooting liberal fish in a Democratic barrel means like there was a lot of gay people in New York.
And they felt a certain way about politics for whatever reason. Maybe, one party's trying to...
Maybe because they had just left their hometowns where they were ostracized, and New York and liberals was the only place that was hospitable to a lot of these folks. But let's continue. Now this is, of course, our 35th episode that we have dedicated to Brandon Straucha. Because he is the mind behind the most important political and social movement of our time. Of course, I'm talking about the Walk Away movement. This is the movement that encouraged more voters to vote for Democrats in the midterm election than in any time in history. And it's brilliant the way he's done this, because he's framed it as if he's trying to get people to not vote for Democrats. But by doing everything he's doing, it's actually driven people to Democrats. I mean, that's his argument anyways, isn't it? Is that what it is? I'm doing a walk away campaign to get people to vote for Democrats. I'm confused.
But it's not just a campaign.
Right, it's a movement.
This is how he wraps up the speech here.
And so now the table has been set. And it's time for Walkaway to launch our strategic plan to stop the Democratic Party dead in its tracks before 2020.
Woo!
We now have the Walkaway Foundation, our educational nonprofit organization, which will be supporting our nationwide roadshow speaking tour, our college campus tours, our Walkaway video series dedicated to debunking liberal media lies and myths and addressing the issues that affect our society. We will continue to use creative mediums to communicate with and affect change in minority communities. It is time for all minorities in America to walk away.
Yeah, there you go. Oh, it's time for all the minorities in America to walk away. I'm not sure from where or to what, but just get out of the way, you.
All you minorities at CPAC, walk away, please.
Yes, I would love the camera to turn around and just see like who he's talking to. Incidentally, the way this racket runs is you make yourself a nonprofit, and then you can take huge donations, and it can be completely opaque as to who's giving you the money. And then, of course, he doesn't derive any money maybe from the nonprofit, although maybe he does. Like the nonprofit's going to need a director, right? And that salary could pay. So it's a nonprofit. And what they do with all the funds, they pay the executive director, Brandon Straka. And then, of course, they're not going to, Brandon's going to charge the schools and the locations directly, and the nonprofit will pay for him to get there. And there'll be some hinky-dinky thing like this. This dude's going to make a ton of cash. And, I mean, frankly, CPAC is the perfect place for him because it really is just a series of grifters who are all launching their product lines, essentially. It's sort of like, it's like the NAB, you know, or where they start to like show like, here's our technology and we hope to sell this. We're going to bring this to market in the next month. And that's what the CPAC is. It's just for grifting, for political grifting. And so kudos to Brandon. He was able to do that. Is that all the footage we have of him? Because we're running out. We need to do another episode. Is there any more?
And we are going to connect with the youth of America, and we are going to shift the youth vote to the right.
I don't think so.
It is time now for every conservative American to be a rebel. Because the most rebellious thing one can do today is to stand up boldly and proudly and say, I am a proud and patriotic American, and I will not surrender my country to the party of hate.
Wait, what? I thought we were the party of hate. Wait, no? This is like literally, I want to say it's textbook, but it's like if you read The Reactionary Mind by Corey Robin, I mean, this is exactly what like reactionary, what it means to be a reactionary. That is to rebrand, bringing back the old and existing power structure as if what you're doing is rebellious in some way.
Well, yeah, his conception of how to liberate minorities, he calls himself the unsilent minority, is to stop the Democrats dead in their tracks. That's all we need to do, really, to liberate minorities.
We're going to bring it back to a time where, listen, we're going to be rebels by making sure that there is a patriarchy and making sure that we maintain white supremacy. Because there's no, we don't have that. We got to bring it back. Not bring it back. We got to just invent it for the first time.
I love to characterize myself as a defender of underdogs and then talk about how great Trump is.
Right, exactly. What? Just amazing. All right, but speaking of Donald Trump visited CPAC and gave a 2-hour speech. He loves it there. Where are we starting with these speeches? Oh yeah. There has been a lot of reporting on the sexual assaults that have taken place in and around the border and amongst the children who are housed at these facilities to basically stockpile immigrants. I don't think that's what Donald Trump is talking about. But look at how sympathetic he is to immigrants.
Their southern border. It's 2,000 miles down from our southern border. I wish Mexico would stop them. But they have their own difficulties, frankly. I understand that. We're working along well with them. And they are doing a lot of things to help us with asylum and other elements of what we're doing. But mothers who love their daughters give them massive amounts of birth control pills because they know their daughters are going to be raped on the way up to our southern border. Think of that. True story. Told to me by the Border Patrol. So true and so sad. Think of how evil that is. Think of how bad it is. Those caravans. You look at those caravans, and some are phenomenal people. But in those caravans, you have stone-cold killers. You had the interview done by some innocent person who I think is...
Yeah, okay. So instead of Donald Trump saying, hey, by making these people undocumented, by forcing them to rely on smugglers and allowing them to be exploited once in their country, in our country, the solution is not to help these people, but it's to make it even worse, I guess, so that they don't do this. There's a story today about police officers in El Salvador who are fleeing the country because of the level of violence there. They are being targeted and they are fleeing the country because of the violence. Even if decades of our foreign policy in Central and Latin America wasn't at least one of the major proximate causes for this level of violence today. When you have mothers, even if we take everything he's saying at complete face value, mothers who are so terrified of their daughters being raped that they provide them with birth control, they're still willing to send them north because of how dangerous it is in their countries, right? How can you come to any other conclusion other than the humane thing to do is to let them in to this country and give them asylum? Like, how can you calculate and say, like, look at the horrors that these people are willing to send their children into? That's how horrific their current situation is. And so our response is what? I mean, he's telling them this story because he's trying to make it seem like these people don't care about their kids. That's what this story is about. He's not showing sympathy or empathy with these people. He's trying to make them out to be some type of animal. And they are lapping it up at CPAC. And we're not talking about somebody who has an AM talk show, you know, in South Carolina, you know, the South Carolina, Georgia, and, you know, the worst parts of Florida. We're talking about the President of the United States. Fits right in with that CPAC crowd. Here is, I mean, the reason why he gives a 2-hour speech at CPAC is because this is the lunacy that is the right. And this is the lunacy that has been the right for years. In many respects, Donald Trump is uncovering a massive problem that we've had in this country. Just because he is a perfect reflection of it, he is of it. And it's just risen now to the point where it's completely not, you can't ignore it. Some try. John Hickenlooper, or whatever his name is, tries to go on TV and pretend like none of this is real, like it's just isolated to this one guy. But it is a significant portion of the country. is represented by the ideas and this guy. And not just represented, he is representative of them. That's just the reality. Here he is talking about the problem that we don't have enough free speech in this country. That's the problem.
Announce that I will be very soon signing an executive order requiring colleges and universities to support free speech if they want federal research dollars. If they want our dollars and we give it to them by the billions, they've got to allow people like Hayden and many other great young people and old people to speak. Free speech. And if they don't, it will be very costly. That'll be signed very soon. Every day we're restoring common sense.
Pause it. First off, I don't believe that he's going to sign that, but it's also a ridiculous, it's not free speech to force a college or university, the government, to force them to allow specific speakers to speak.
That'd be state subsidized speech.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that would be forced speech. In fact, that's what the basis of the supposedly the Janus ruling was, right? That you can actually force people to speak, even if they're not adopting it, even if they're not even speaking themselves. So, I mean, horribly unconstitutional, will not pass any muster, would be my guess.
The roar of the crowd, though, was insane.
Oh, yes. And I love the fact that we can gag the speech of doctors when it comes to abortion advice. But continue.
Restoring common sense and the timeless values that unite us all. We believe in the Constitution and the rule of law. We believe in the First Amendment right. And we believe in religious liberty.
There you go. I don't know what happened to my German music, but with all due respect. Lastly, here is Donald Trump at CPAC. And the U.S. economy serving everybody, according to Donald Trump. This is his. I mean, this is part of his 2-hour speech.
But everyone in this great country, right now, because of our great new economy, is doing well, except, of course, for the never-Trumpers. But they are on mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. It's mouth-to-mouth. Mouth-to-mouth. Not mouth to anything. Mouth-to-mouth. They're hanging in. There are a couple of them. I mean, these guys have gotten me wrong. Not only never-Trumpers. You have never-Trumpers. You have certain hardline. They're basically dishonest people.
Well, there you go, basically. There you go. I feel like his swoop is he's having to go further and further down the side of his head. Am I just imagining that, or? You know.
They might be fixed.
Yeah.
Plastics. Just a tangent. I was watching Sex and the City this weekend.
Yes.
And Donald Trump makes a cameo in that show.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
No, I'm not surprised.
3 or 4.
No. There it is. Your president at CPAC, ladies and gentlemen. All right. We're not going to have time for any more phone calls. Let's play this, though, because I do want to play this. To a certain extent, this is a correction. Want to make a correction here. We have claimed, probably off of according to Jerry Seinfeld, a misreading of a New York Times piece. Now, he characterizes it a little bit less, a little bit more, I think, sort of like innocently than I think it was. but my understanding it was in the context of New York Times, and it was not. It was a complaint that he was echoing and using someone else's claim as authority.
I have the quote here. It says, I hear that all the time, Seinfeld said on The Herd with Colin Cowherd. I don't play colleges, but I hear a lot of people tell me, don't go near colleges, they're so PC.
Right. But what's more important is, why is he saying that? Like, does he say before and after that, like, and that's ridiculous?
No, he says they just want to use these words. That's racist. That's sexist. That's prejudice. He said they don't want to know what the hell they don't know what the hell they're talking about.
That's what Jerry Seinfeld says.
Correct.
So in other words, here is the evidence for my assertion that these people are whack. And but apparently he doesn't like the blowback he's been getting from that. Here is a conversation with I'm sorry, Andy Kindler. I apologize. That Jerry Seinfeld has with Ricky Gervais on this very topic.
It's not good enough, and I've never thought it was good enough. Well, I'm torn. I think it should be good enough to say I was joking. But we don't tell certain jokes because we know they're, in inverted commas, wrong.
We've always done that. From the court jester had to do that. The court jester could make a little fun of the palace, but not too much, and not the wrong
right
thing.
Things. About the right things.
Yes.
Like, you know, he could make fun of, oh, this guy's too powerful, or look
Right.
how, you know, he could crush us all, and that guy would be laughing. It's the same way when you're
as long as the king's laughing, it's okay.
And you learn that on the streets when you're a kid, that you could tease the bigger kid, like doing jokes like, oh, he beat up a nun. He would laugh at that.
Yeah.
But you couldn't attack his weakness.
Right.
Really.
But
So
this frustrates me a little bit.
the mental agility that is required to execute this job is an essential part of it.
Pause it for 1 second. Now, I just want to make it clear here, though. There's one thing to say the court jester can't question the power too directly, or they'll get their head chopped off, right? Like the good court jester was actually mocking the king, and the king wasn't aware of it. That you were actually working on two levels, right? That's what good comedy does. Works on multiple levels. But understand when we talk about mocking trans people or mocking gay people or mocking people because, based on race or whatnot, you're not challenging the power. Understand that. But nevertheless, continued.
Ron Bennington is the third mic there, by the way, comedian.
Okay.
This job is an essential part of it. Comedians complaining, oh, I can't do this joke now because so-and-so is going to be offended. That's right, you can't. So do another joke. Find another way around it. Use a different word. It's like slalom skiing. You have to make the gates.
But I sort of do a different way. Because I know you've been quoted, I don't know if it's true, that you say, oh, I don't want to play colleges anymore because they're too PC.
Please
and they
stop with that.
Is that not true?
No, it's not true.
Right,
it's
good.
amazing, the legs that got.
Good. I'm glad it's not true.
I said it in the Times. I had an interview in the New York Times last week, and the guy asked me about it. I said, can we please put this to rest? I never said it.
Good.
Here's what I said. A comedian told me he doesn't want to play colleges anymore.
Right.
That's what I said.
Right. That makes me want to play colleges.
Yes.
If someone says they won't like your stuff, I go, when am I on? When am I on?
Yeah. I mean, the problem is that you followed up as if that was backing up your claim that these kids just want to say sexism all the time. And look, there's no doubt that among the youth, and I would say, it's probably true the younger you get, that their understanding of this stuff is less sophisticated than somebody who's like, 25 or 30. But that's true of everything, right? Whether it's Donald Trump is bad president or nutrition or whatever it is. Yes, children, kids, college students have a less developed sense of things, broadly speaking, generally, than older people. That's the profundity? Or are you just resenting that in their hands, these ideas become out of control, you'll live. I promise you. You're going to be fine. That is the best case scenario. I mean, it's sort of like what Dianne Feinstein said to those kids who came in about climate change, too.
I mean, jesters probably had a lot of leeway to make jokes about peasants.
Yeah. A lot of leeway. The people who are complaining about the jesters making the jokes of the peasants, they're just like throwing stuff around, like exploitation and words like that. They just like to say it. You're exploiting the peasants.
They say black
plague.
plague.
They don't even know what exploitation means. Let's do a couple IMs, then we got to get out of here. Sam's Tinder profile. Hey, girl, swipe right, and I'll show you just how expansive my progressive movement is. Rocky T texts, Sam, it's my 33rd birthday. Can I get a shofar? Indeed, you can. Producer Lauren, wasn't Reagan the name of the girl possessed by the devil in The Exorcist? No offense to Reagan Gomez. Slash the Fash. Doug in Denver. Hickenlooper Kasich shows there's no difference between Dems and Republicans. Sam, what's your first debate in the libertarian race? I got to look into that. Sam Snuff Stash. Shut up. Kentucky Fried Comrade. Hey, Sam, make fun of Hickenlooper all you want, but many of us find his new campaign slogan, fuck it, why not? Compelling and refreshing. Wingman 2020. Do you know what my shirt is made of? Boyfriend, girlfriend material. That one's free, bruh. Really cool. The fun frontier is where it's at unless you hit the wall, the paywall. USA and the UK. Have you seen Pete Buttigieg, current mayor of South Bend? In the last 8 years, he's a millennial Afghan vet, Rhodes Scholar, openly gay, married to a man. He may not be the one for 2020, but one to watch in the future.
I listened to a full Pod Save episode with Pete on this weekend, and he's good.
Yeah, he is good, isn't he? Dave Dawson from Minnesota, please. Sam, let's be honest. What they want to hear about the race and gender, it's a promotion of meritocracy across race and gender lines. They want to hear anecdotes about dreamers who graduated at the top of their class. They don't want to hear about racialized poverty or criminal justice reform. They just want somebody who's going to pander. But as soon as Bernie did that, they would accuse him of pandering. Congressional baseball fan. A ball field is not a ball field without both a left, center, and right field. So lefties hitting into right is only natural. Left is best. 3 more. Marcuse Lexi. Tom from Lexington. Intersectionality is useless without class consciousness. These Hillary people missed that completely. David from Montreal. 10 years ago today, according to Jewish calendar, my father died of skin cancer at age 67. He had melanoma 4 times over 20 years. Fortunately, we live in Canada where universal health care is free for all citizens. Had we lived in the United States, we might not have been so fortunate. He might not have been able to afford treatment, or his insurance could have been refused. In the U.S., he could have died in 89 rather than 2009. Thanks to free universal health care, he lived 20 more years. Health care is a right and should be free for every human being. Keep up the fight. Can I get a shofar from my dad? Yes, you can. And the final I am of the day, Demosthenes. It's important to note that the wall is an implosion of our right of expansion over our neighbors to the south. We are the ones who get to expand and will prevent others from doing so to enable ourselves. See you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bar, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I guess somewhere the choice was made for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between the 101 and the 5. Do you know how far the detour takes